Namaste. This talk is a continuation of Chapter 8 of the Stri Dharma Paddhatih. The Chapter 8 covers Dehali Puja, Svastika, and Rangavalli. Dehali Puja we looked into in the previous video. In this one, we will talk about the Svastika, and in the subsequent video, we will cover Rangavalli. The swastika is a well-known sign of good luck, of prosperity, and of auspiciousness. It is not just popular among Hindus, but also among Buddhists and Jains. And it's not just the Indian community who uses these, but also the Native American community, several African communities, and Eurasian communities. When we try to understand the meaning of the swastika, often people explain it in terms of the symbols. For example, it is said that the 4 lines represent the 4 purusharthas, dharma, artha, kama, moksha, or the 4 ashramas, and so on. But if that were the only reason, then we can also simply draw anything else and call it dharma, artha, kama, moksha. We can draw 4 concentric circles. We can draw 4 squares, 4 horizontal lines, anything. Why that particular shape? This is important to understand, because behind all symbolism is a profound science. The symbols are there to help us remember the way in which that design has to be made. But the design itself is much more than the symbols. When we forget the science and retain only the symbols, that is when the sacred kumkuma becomes the sticker bindi. The natural materials like flowers and leaves used to decorate the main door becomes plastic torans. And the rangoli itself, most of the times these days, is just a sticker stuck in front of the home. These are not symbols. Therefore, we must understand what lies behind the symbols. What is the foundation from which the symbols arose? We will try to do that in this talk. Further, we will understand what is the correct way of drawing it so that its auspiciousness is enhanced. We will do this through a small demonstration. But first, let's look at what the Shastras mention about swastika. Every verse of the Shastra is pregnant with profound science. It depends on how deep we are able to go to unearth that wisdom through Devi's Anugraha. There is only one verse about swastika in chapter 8 of the Stri Dharma Paddhatih, and it says, Akrita swastikam yatu krame liptam cha medinim tasya strini vinashyanti vittamayur yashastatha. Those who walk on the ground where the swastika symbol is not drawn after smearing it with cow dung will be deprived of 3 things: wealth, longevity, and honor. Now, the Shastras are telling us that after cow dung is smeared, and we've covered the purpose of smearing cow dung in an earlier talk. So after cow dung is smeared, it must be covered with the mark of the swastika and later the Rangavalli. So whichever surface was smeared with cow dung, whether it was the front yard or even the floor inside the house, all those surfaces had to have the swastika drawn. Otherwise, the Shastra says that it takes away wealth, longevity, and honor. Now we'll try to decode this verse. The cow dung, when dry, collects a lot of charge on its surface. It is an antioxidant, which means that it is capable of giving off electrons freely without turning into a free radical. So all these electrons that are released gather on the surface of the cow dung as static charge. Static charge, when left alone, tends to interact with the charge in its vicinity. Now, because the surface of cow dung has the collection or the accumulation of negatively charged electrons, it will tend to attract and pull positively charged ions from the body of the person who walks over it. So if we walk over the surface of dried cow dung where swastika is not drawn, then the electrons, which are static on the surface of the cow dung, will tend to attract the opposite charge. So within our body, there will be an accumulation of positively charged ions in the lower part, that is in the feet, the legs, and the reproductive organs. This phenomena is not new to us. This is exactly what happens in static electricity. Many of us would have experienced when the weather is dry, especially during winter. And if we touch a certain metal object, we experience a sudden shock, or we can even sometimes see a spark. So if there is a particular type of charge accumulated at the tip of our fingers, and if there is the opposite charge on the surface which we are touching, the charges tend to jump over to the other opposite end. And in the process, static currents are produced. Now, this does not happen while working with the liquid cow dung during the process of smearing it, because moisture does not allow the accumulation of static charge. Whatever relevant studies explain this is given in the book and can be referred to by those who want to see the studies. Now, coming back to the charge interaction between the surface of the cow dung and the human body. Now, in colloquial language, when we say positive, we think it's good. When we say negative, we think it's bad. But in the language of physics, the meaning is actually the opposite. So positive ions mean weakened immunity, poor health. It means a depletion of prana. And negative ions mean good health, better immunity, and an enhancement of prana. So in the human body, when there is excess of positive charge pulled by the electrons on the surface of dried cow dung, when that positive charge accumulates in the reproductive region, we face problems associated with that. So there's a depletion of prana. And in the lower part of the body, it is the Mooladhara at the subtlest level which sends prana. So the prana from the Mooladhara is depleted by this process. And when the Mooladhara is thus weakened, our overall lifespan is reduced. That is why it says it affects longevity, because prana is being drained from the body. It affects wealth because Mooladhara is what gives us the capacity to work and thereby attract wealth. But a weakened Mooladhara is directly correlated to lack of wealth or poverty. And then it says that we lose honor. This is because a weak Mooladhara can create addictive behaviors, addictive to substances, or addictive to addiction to certain behaviors that are not conducive, will naturally happen if the Mooladhara is weak by depletion of prana. In fact, even depression at the subtlest level is a Mooladhara that is unable to hold prana and is feeling this depletion. That is why the Shastras are saying, if you walk on a surface that is smeared with cow dung, make sure that the swastika mark is drawn. Now, how does the swastika change this situation? A static charge creates what we call an electric field. Electric fields are linear in nature. A positive charge will have an electric field that is outward directed. A negative charge has an electric field that is inward directed. That is why the electron tends to pull the oppositely charged positive ions from our body towards it. If this behavior has to change, then these static electric charges must be made to move. And we must make them move in such a fashion that it is clockwise, so that instead of an electric field which is linear, there will be an electromagnetic field which is a closed loop or circular in nature. We also mentioned this in the chapter on Dehali Puja, that when the electromagnetic fields that are created are clockwise in nature, they give off prana because the magnetic force acts outward. When these fields are anti-clockwise in nature, they suck or draw in prana because the magnetic force acts inward or has a pulling effect. So, when the swastika is drawn, if you look at the design closely, there are gaps between the lines. And that is because when this is drawn with a particular material, such as the rangoli powder, which is actually quartz powder, or we use rice powder, on top of cow dung especially, we use rice powder because rice is a dielectric and dielectrics can store charge. So the charge that is accumulated on the surface of the cow dung gets stored in the particles of rice. Because there is a gap and because there's a dot in the center of the design of each section of the swastika, the particles tend to jump over to the other side. And because of this jumping action of the particles from one line to another in search of the opposite charge, there is a clockwise movement of particles created. The way to know this, there's a simple way for those who are subtle. Being subtle means you are in complete control of your external senses. You can quieten them at will. The mind can become absolutely still, and naturally the body must also be steady. If we are able to come into that state, just draw a small swastika using the quartz powder or turmeric powder, the size of your palm, and then place your palm over it and stay in that state for about a minute or so. You will distinctly feel the circular movement. After a while, it will gain pace and it is like a circular vortex. And you can feel that in your palm if you're sensitive enough. If you're not sensitive enough, then we can do a small experiment to see how this works using the Japamala. The Japamala, as mentioned in the previous video, is a piezoelectric material. Whether it is made of Rudraksh or the Svastika mala or coral or any other gemstone, it will be able to detect these fields. So once the swastika is drawn, if you hold the Japamala over it, you will see this clockwise movement that is created. If the swastika is drawn anti-clockwise, then you will clearly see that the field generated is anti-clockwise. In some practices, like for exorcisms or in certain tantric practices, the anti-clockwise swastika is used by those who know how to use it because they're dealing with what we call inauspicious energies. See, when a human loses the prana in the body, or when prana leaves the body, we call it a dead body. For such a body, when we do the pradakshina, the circumambulation, we do it in the anti-clockwise direction, isn't it? So if that Atma has not yet attained spiritual liberation, or if it is not a Devata, all such Atmas, when they leave the body, they will carry an anti-clockwise field. If we draw the anti-clockwise swastika, we will end up attracting those. Therefore, make sure that the swastika that we draw is always clockwise. This is the way for normal grihasthas to draw the swastika. It must be clockwise. Once the surface of the cow dung has been covered with these clockwise swastika marks, then there is no longer charge interaction and it is safe to walk over it. In later verses, the Shastras also mention that we must never directly sit on the surface where cow dung is smeared, because then those static charges will again interact with the body. Therefore, a darba mat must be placed on the surface of it before we sit on it. Again, these mats must not be made of plastic because this is not a mere symbol. There is a science to it. Now we come to how to draw the swastika mark correctly. There are several videos available online that will teach us not to draw it by crossing the lines. Instead, to draw it in a way where the lines do not intersect each other. So we will just see what is the difference that it makes by drawing the swastika on one hand by crossing the lines and on the other hand without crossing the lines. In the first case, where the swastika is drawn by crossing the lines, when we hold the japamala over it, we will see that it does turn clockwise. So it is not exactly inauspicious. But you will see that the extent of the circular movement of the japamala only covers the size of the swastika. So that is the radius within which the charge moves clockwise and the field moves clockwise. Now, when we come to the other swastika, which is drawn without cutting across the lines, and we hold the japamala over it, we will see that the field goes much beyond the extent of the size of the swastika. It covers a much larger area. So we can say that it is much more auspicious than drawing it by crossing the lines. When such a swastika is drawn either at the Dehali or in front of the home, it enhances the clockwise fields. When the clockwise fields are high and we invoke the Devata Shaktis, they are easily able to be in that space and enter the home. If we do not draw the swastika mark, we will observe that an empty front space of the home or the main door, the threshold, has natural anti-clockwise fields. So they will be conducive to those entities which have anti-clockwise fields, and that is what will enter our home. And that's why some of the homes always experience inauspicious incidents. The simple remedy is by drawing the swastika. Again, a sticker swastika will not serve the same purpose because there has to be particles for particle interaction to move the charge in the clockwise manner. So use the quartz powder, which is a rangoli powder, if you're not using cow dung. If you're using cow dung, then use the rice powder, which can hold the charge and make it easier for it to move. You can also use turmeric powder or kumkuma. Make sure that you use natural substances to facilitate the particle movement. This is the beauty of Sanatana Dharma, that nothing is merely symbolic. This is the religion of science, not of symbols. By Devi's anugraha, we can all understand and practice this living, breathing science. Shri Matre Namaha.